A ship moves alone across the Atlantic, her sails torn, her wheel unmanned. Not a soul on board. This is the Mary Celeste. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Just search for The Michael Braa Show on Insta, Facebook, YouTube, or the KC CBS 47 Plus app. When we tell stories about mysteries, we often confuse what we want with what we know. Few tales show this better than the Mary Celeste. In late 1872, a perfectly good merchant ship was discovered adrift. No crew, no lifeboat, and no clear answers. In the century and a half since, her story has grown into legend, the ghost ship, the riddle of the sea, a case that seemed to invite every theory from pirates to sea monsters to the supernatural. But here's the truth. Much of what you've heard about the Mary Celeste isn't fact. It's myth layered over myth, sometimes by sensational reporters, and sometimes by storytellers who couldn't resist making the tale stranger still. Warm meals left on the table, coffee still steaming. Those details belong to fiction, not history. So what actually happened out there? Why would an experienced captain with his wife and 2-year-old daughter on board order his crew off a sound ship and onto a small lifeboat in the middle of the Atlantic? And why did no one ever see them again? In this episode, we're going to do two things. First, we'll build the case as investigators, going back to the original records, the court hearings, and the physical evidence. We'll separate what's confirmed from what's disputed, what's unverified, and of course, what's purely speculative. Second, we'll look at the myths, those sea monsters, the Bermuda Triangle, the cursed ship stories, and ask why they've lasted longer than the facts. Because the Mary Celeste just isn't about what happened to 10 people in 1872. It's about what we do when we're faced with the unknown. By the end, we may not have all the answers, but we'll understand the difference between the mystery at sea and the mystery inside of us. The ship we know today as the Mary Celeste began her life in 1861 at a small shipyard on the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia. Originally christened the Amazon, she was an ordinary wooden brigantine built for coastal and transatlantic trade. From the start, though, her record seemed unlucky. Her first captain died suddenly on her maiden voyage, and she collided with another vessel in the English Channel. She changed hands several times. In 1868, she was sold to American owners, re-registered and given a new name, Mary Celeste. After an extensive refit in New York in 1872, she was judged a solid, seaworthy vessel of about 280 tons. The man chosen to command her that fall was Captain Benjamin Briggs, a 37-year-old New Englander with a reputation for discipline and caution. Briggs wasn't simply an employee. He held an ownership stake in the vessel. He was a devout, family-oriented man who had spent most of his adult life at sea. For this voyage, bound for Genoa, Italy, he made an unusual decision. He brought along his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia. Their 7-year-old son, Arthur, remained at home in Massachusetts with his grandmother. To crew the Mary Celeste, Briggs selected 7 sailors he believed trustworthy. His first mate, Albert Richardson, was both a close friend and a relative by marriage, with years of experience. The second mate, Andrew Gelling, was young but competent. The steward, Edward Head, came recommended by one of the ship's owners. 4 other crewmen, all Germans from the Frieson Islands, rounded out the company. Briggs' letters before departure note his satisfaction with both the vessel and his crew. The cargo was more than 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, co-signed to merchants in Genoa. It was volatile, not drinkable, but it was valuable. Loading took place in October, and by early November, the ship was ready. On November 5th, 1872, Mary Celeste left Pier 50 on New York's East River. Bad weather delayed her departure for 2 days at Staten Island, but on November 7th, she finally cleared the harbor and headed into the open Atlantic. For the next 2 weeks, she made steady progress eastward. The log entries, the last dated November 25th, near the Azores, gave no sign of trouble. And then the record stops. The next time the Mary Celeste was seen, 9 days later, she was drifting empty on the ocean. On December 4th, 1872, the British brigantine De Gracia was about halfway across the Atlantic when her crew spotted another vessel on the horizon. The ship was making erratic progress under the partial sail. She yawed from side to side, not holding a steady course. And no one appeared on deck. As the vessels drew closer, De Gracia's captain, David Morehouse, recognized the ship's name painted across the stern, Mary Celeste. The next day, Morehouse ordered his first mate, Oliver Deveau, and 2 sailors aboard the derelict. What they found was puzzling. The Mary Celeste was still afloat and capable of sailing. Her hull showed no serious damage, and the cargo of more than 1,700 barrels of alcohol was still intact. But the ship was deserted. Some things immediately stood out. The lifeboat was gone, and the ropes at the davits were frayed, as though it had been lowered in haste. The sails were in disarray, and some were missing, others torn, and lines hung loosely from the rigging. About 3.5 feet of water sloshed in the hold. Not unusual for a vessel of her age, but enough to cause concern if the crew believed it was rising. On the deck laid an improvised sounding rod, as if someone had been checking the depth of the water. Inside, the cabins were damp and disorderly, likely from spray and weather. The captain's bed was unmade and wet. In the galley, the stove had been shifted from its position, but food stores and fresh water were abundant. Nothing was cooking, nothing was prepared. Importantly, the crew's belongings remained: clothing, pipes, even boots. Valuables were untouched. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no struggle. What was missing were the people, along with the ship's chronometer, sextant, and most of the papers, the very items a captain would take if abandoning ship. The ship's logbook was found in the mate's cabin. Its last entry, dated November 25th, near the Azores, recording an uneventful position. Now, faced with this mystery, Captain Morehouse divided his men. Deveau and a small crew sailed the Mary Celeste, while Morehouse continued on with the De Gracia. 9 days later, both vehicles reached Gibraltar, where the abandoned ship was impounded and a formal inquiry began. When the Mary Celeste arrived in Gibraltar in mid-December 1872, she became the subject of an official salvage hearing before the Vice Admiralty Court. The case was unusual. Salvage proceedings normally focus on value and reward, not mystery. But the disappearance of 10 people from a seaworthy vessel demanded answers. The hearing opened on December 17th before Chief Justice Sir James Cochrane. Representing the Crown was Frederick Sallyfold, Gibraltar's Attorney General. From the outset, Sallyfold suspected foul play. He pressed the idea that something criminal had happened, either at the hands of Mary Celeste's crew or more darkly involving the men of the De Gracia. Surveyors inspected the ships closely. They noted 2 curious cuts on her bow and a stain on the captain's sword that looked suspicious. Some claimed to see gouges in the railing as if made by an axe. These details suggested a theory of violence, but further tests undermined that case. The reddish stains were analyzed in London and proved not to be blood. A U.S. naval officer, Captain Sheffield, examined the supposed axe marks and judged them to be natural wear from the sea. Despite the lack of proof, Sallyfold floated the dramatic theories. He suggested the crew had broken into the alcohol cargo, gotten drunk, and murdered the captain and his family before fleeing in the lifeboat. Others hinted that owner James Winchester might have staged a fraud, or that Captain Morehouse of the De Gracia knew more than he admitted. But these accusations never held. The alcohol was industrial grade, not drinkable, and no valuables were missing. There was no evidence that Morehouse or Winchester profited from anything beyond the ordinary salvage claim. Meanwhile, the U.S. consul at Gibraltar, Horatio Sprague, reported the case home to Washington with disbelief. He called it a mystery that no human ingenuity can penetrate. His dispatches stressed the absence of violence, the orderliness of the abandonment, and the lack of motive for a crime. In February 1873, after nearly 2 months of hearings, The court released the Mary Celeste to continue her voyage. The salvage award was set unusually low, about a fifth of the ship's and the cargo's value. That's a signal that the judge still harbored suspicions, even without any evidence. The award left de Gracia's crew disappointed and tainted with rumors, though nothing was ever proved against them. And so, the investigation closed with no solution. The Mary Celeste sailed on to deliver her cargo, while the unanswered questions remain. The courts had established only this: a sound ship was abandoned, and the reason was lost with the people. From the moment the Mary Celeste was found adrift, speculation has never stopped. Some explanations rely on straightforward seamanship under stress, others pushed into darker or stranger territory. Let's begin with the theories grounded in evidence. One of the strongest possibilities is the alcohol fume panic. 9 barrels in the cargo were later found empty. They had been made of red oak, a wood known to leak more easily than white oak. It's plausible that fumes escaped into the hold. Industrial alcohol vapors are volatile, and even a small spark from a lantern could have set off an explosive flash. Some investigators suggest that Captain Briggs, fearing just such a blast, ordered the hatches open for ventilation and briefly evacuated the crew into the lifeboat. If the tow line snapped in rough seas, the ship and the boat could have been separated almost instantly. This theory accounts for the missing lifeboat, the open hatches, and the otherwise orderly state of the ship. Another explanation centers on false flooding readings. The ship had about 3.5 feet of water in the hold. Not fatal, but concerning. On deck, the de Gracia's men found an improvised sounding rod, as if the crew of the Mary Celeste had been trying to measure water levels. If a faulty pump or a misreading convinced Briggs that the ship was sinking, he may have taken his family and crew onto the yaw, believing abandonment to be the safer option. Again, a parted tow line could have sealed their fate. Weather could have played a role as well. Reports confirming a gale swept the Azores around November 25th, the date of the last log entry. Some writers suggest a waterspout or even a rogue wave struck the Mary Celeste, causing sudden flooding, tearing sails, and frightening the crew into leaving the vessel. While the ship showed no catastrophic damage, the shifted stove and loose rigging hint at a violent jolt. Of course, none of these theories can be proven, yet together they sketch a picture of cautious captain making a tragic misjudgment. Better to abandon a ship that seemed doomed than risk the lives on board. Not all explanations for the Mary Celeste come from measured investigation. Many of the enduring belong in the realm of speculation, rumor, or outright legend. One of the earliest came from Gibraltar itself. Attorney General Frederick Soliflud insisted the crew must have broken into the cargo hold, gotten drunk, and murdered the captain, his wife, and their child before escaping into the lifeboat. The story spread quickly in newspapers because it offered a dramatic human villain. But the facts dismantle it. The alcohol was industrial and poisonous, not drinkable. No valuables were missing, no blood was found, and no bodies were ever required. The idea of mutiny made for headlines, but collapsed under scrutiny. A second line of speculation was piracy, or an at-sea attack. This too made sense to a Victorian audience consumed with tales of raiders on the horizon. Yet by 1872, the mid-Atlantic was not plagued by pirates, and when Mary Celeste was boarded and her cargo valuables were still on board, well, so much for that story. More telling, the missing chronometer and sextant suggested the crew themselves had taken their navigation tools, not that outsiders had forced them off. Later, suspicion turned towards insurance fraud or conspiracy. Some suggested that the owners, James Winchester, or maybe even Captain David Morehouse of the de Gracia, had engineered the abandonment to profit from salvage or insurance payouts. But again, the evidence does not hold. Briggs had a personal stake in the ship and no incentive to lose it. The salvage award was far smaller than the conspirators could have ever hoped, and no irregular insurance claims were ever filed. As the years passed without answers, the theories just grew wilder. Writers imagined a giant squid rising from the deep to snatch the crew one by one, leaving the ship behind. Others, much later, folded the Mary Celeste into the legend of the Bermuda Triangle, even though she was found near the Azores, thousands of miles away. Still, others hinted at alien abductions, supernatural curses, or disappearances into another dimension. These ideas obviously have no basis in evidence, but they stick because they're memorable. What unites all of these explanations from mutiny to monsters is their appeal to imagination rather than fact. They fill the silence with villains, conspiracies, or creatures. In reality, none of these accounts survive in comparison to the ship's actual condition. The Mary Celeste was not looted, not burned, and not bloodied. The real mystery is quieter, more tragic. A captain who believed he was making a prudent decision, and a crew lost because that decision proved fatally wrong. The rest is legend.
Trust. It's hard to get and easy to lose. When the risk of loss is great and people are hurting, who do you trust? How about the people trusted by the biggest names in business, agriculture, and government? Atlanta's Private Investigations, building trust one case at a time.
I'm Michael, founder of Atlanta's Private Investigations. Let's talk. When you need help, your answers are here.
Well, sure, I remember it like it was yesterday. I was going through a devastating divorce. That's hard already. Then my ex hid our money and tried to take the kids from me. My attorney suggested I call Atlanta's Private Investigations. That was the turning point. Michael and his team got me the proof I needed to get my children back and secure our future.
I'm Michael from Atlanta's Private Investigations. Let's talk. When you need help, your answers are here.
So, we've gone over all the practical theories. Leaking alcohol, faulty pumps, rogue waves, and they're reasonable, but they're boring. And honestly, they don't make for good headlines. You can't slap faulty pump panic on the front page and expect people to buy papers. Victorians wanted drama. They wanted monsters and villains and mysteries. And the tabloids, they delivered. Welcome to Kara's Corner, and tonight we're going to dive into some of the wilder theories about what happened to the Mary Celeste. One of the most enduring explanations is that something from the deep took the crew. In the 1800s, sailors genuinely believed in the Kraken, a giant squid capable of pulling down entire ships. That idea wasn't completely imaginary. Giant squids are real, and some have measured over 40 feet long with eyes about 1 foot across. When remains washed ashore or tangled in nets, that was proof enough for sailors that monsters existed. Another real contender in the sea monster category is the Humboldt squid, also known as the red devil. These squid can grow to around 5 feet long and up to 100 pounds. They travel in large groups and can move through the water at about 15 miles per hour and communicate with each other by using color flashes, where they change from red to white. Humboldt squid live in the eastern Pacific Ocean. Their range stretches from Chile to Peru all the way up to Northern California. During certain years, especially during El Nino events, they have been documented off the California coast. There have even been reports as far north as Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. For a Victorian audience, the idea that something like that could reach up from the depths wasn't far-fetched at all. And then there's octopuses. They can squeeze through the openings no bigger than a coin, change color instantly, and solve puzzles. One even escaped its tank at a New Zealand aquarium, crossed the floor, and slipped down a drain back into the sea. To people who already feared the unknown like the ocean, animals like this seemed alien and fueled other stories. Of course, there's no evidence that anything like this touched the Mary Celeste. There was no damage, no markings, and no signs of an attack. But to readers at the time, devoured by a kraken was far more exciting than lowered a lifeboat in bad weather. Then there's piracy. Even though the so-called golden age of pirates had ended more than a century before, pirates did it was still a go-to explanation for every maritime mystery. Pirates made easy villains, and blaming them gave the public something to fear. The problem is, piracy doesn't fit the facts of the Mary Celeste. Her cargo was still there, her valuables untouched, and the ship itself was left to drift. Real pirates took what was valuable, the ship's cargo, money, not just the people. So while it made for a good copy, the story of pirates attacking Mary Celeste doesn't hold. But here's the fun part. The Victorian tabloids didn't care if theories made sense. They cared if they sold. This is the same press that gave us the hysteria around Jack the Ripper, mummy curses, and ghost stories. The Mary Celeste was the perfect canvas. An empty ship, no witnesses, and an audience hungry for the bizarre. Papers spun tales of mutiny, murder, and curses. One of the prosecutors even pushed the drunken crew murdered everybody. Despite the small detail that the cargo was industrial alcohol and literally poisonous to drink. Facts didn't matter. Fear did. A mystery with no answers meant you could write whatever you wanted. And the Mary Celeste isn't the only time this has happened. Look at the Flying Dutchman or the Carol A. Deering in 1921. Another vessel found abandoned off North Carolina, sparking pirate and paranormal rumors. Time and again, when a ship turns up without a crew, people default to monsters, villains, or the supernatural. Because the mundane truth, storms, accidents, miscalculations, is just too unsatisfying. People cling to the spectacular. Sea monsters were a way to explain the unknown depths. Pirates gave readers villains to fear. Tabloids exploited both, whipping up dread and selling papers. And the Mary Celeste? She was the ultimate blank page. The crew was gone, the evidence inconclusive, and the imagination of the public filled in the gaps. So did a kraken eat the crew? Did pirates spirit them away? Probably not. But those theories tell us something more interesting than the truth could. They tell us what people were afraid of. In the 1870s, the ocean was still vast, mysterious, and terrifying. And fear, whether of monsters, pirates, or the unknown, always finds its way into print. That's all I have for today. Thank you guys for coming to Kara's Corner, and I'll see you next time.
So, what does Mia, our investigative AI, have to say? Well, the evidence from the Mary Celeste points to an abandonment that was orderly rather than chaotic. The vessel was discovered seaworthy. She carried about 3.5 feet of water in the hold, not unusual for a ship of her age and construction. Her cargo was intact, with the exception of 9 barrels, all made of red oak, that had leaked. Food and water sufficient for 6 months remained untouched. What was missing was a lifeboat, the navigational chronometer, the sextant, and most of the ship's papers. These are precisely the items a captain would remove if planning to navigate away temporarily. The logbook, last used on November 25th near the Azores, recorded nothing abnormal. Earlier suspicions of foul play rested on supposed bloodstains and axe marks, but chemical testing proved the stains were not blood, and naval experts judged the marks to be natural wear. No valuables taken, no signs of struggle, and no evidence ever supported mutiny, piracy, or fraud. The most credible explanations involve ordinary maritime hazards: leaking alcohol, creating explosive fumes, false readings from a faulty pump, dangerous water, or sudden weather such as a waterspout. Each of those could prompt Captain Briggs, traveling with his wife and young daughter, to evacuate the lifeboat as a precaution. The likeliest outcome is that the tow line parted and the yawl was lost at sea. The tragedy was not an abandonment of duty, but a misjudgment born of caution in the face of uncertain danger. The Mary Celeste endures because she leaves us with absence, a ship intact, but no crew, no lifeboat, no last message. That silence invites us to speak for her. Over the years, investigators, journalists, and storytellers have filled that silence with every possibility: murder, mutiny, pirates, monsters, curses, even alien abductions. But none of it has stuck to the evidence, but all of it has stuck to our imagination. What the record actually shows is more ordinary, and in some ways, maybe more haunting. A captain, cautious and experienced, may have believed his ship was in danger. Fumes from volatile cargo, water rising in the hold, weather worsening. He grabbed his wife, his child, and his crew, and made the choice he thought would keep them safe. Instead, that choice, lowering the lifeboat, likely sealed their fate. The facts remind us that human beings don't vanish because of monsters. They vanish because of miscalculations, bad readings, and accidents that compound at the worst possible moment. But we prefer the monsters. We prefer stories that make sense in a single sentence. Pirates did it. The sea took them. The triangle swallowed them whole. In truth, the Mary Celeste was not undone by myth, but by the same force that undoes us all: the limits of human judgment when faced with uncertainty. That is why the story lingers. It's less about a ship lost than about us, looking into an empty cabin and trying to explain what we cannot know. We turn mystery into narrative because mystery unsettles us. The Mary Celeste forces us to live with the gap and reminds us that sometimes the sea keeps her secrets, and all we are left with is the echo of our own fears.